Welcome to my channel. Today, we will take a look at the story of a rideshare driver who picked up an unexpected passenger. Our driver was working late one night when he got a pings. The passenger's pickup location was just around the corner from where he was, so he headed over to the address. He was surprised to find the passenger waiting outside was a young woman, but he didn't think much of it. He opened the door for her, and she got in without saying a word. She put on the seatbelt and asked him to drive to the mall, which was quite a distance away. As they drove, he glanced at the rearview mirror and noticed that his passenger was not looking at him or looking out the window. Instead, she was staring directly at him with an evil grin on her face. He couldn't see her eyes, though. They were completely black, like a bottomless pit. He tried to shake off this strange feeling he was getting from her and focused on the road. The ride to the mall took about 20 minutes. During that time, the driver only heard the woman breathing. She never uttered a sound or even looked away from him. When he finally arrived at the mall, he stopped the car and turned to his passenger to tell her she had arrived. But what he saw made him freeze in his seat. The woman was gone. Not only that, but the back seat was completely empty. He quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car to check on her. Maybe she had slipped out of the car without him noticing. He checked the sides of the car, but there was no sign of her. Then he noticed something. In the back seat, there was a puddle on the floor where she had been sitting, but it wasn't water. It looked like blood. He called 911 to report the incident, but the police didn't seem to take him seriously. They told him over the phone that if he was having some kind of mental breakdown, they could send an ambulance, but he insisted that he was telling the truth. The police eventually sent a patrol car, but by the time they arrived, the mysterious woman was gone. As the days passed, the driver couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watched. He started seeing the same woman everywhere he went. Sometimes he would catch a glimpse of her out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look at her, she was gone. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. But when he got another ping one night, and the passenger's picture showed the same woman, he knew he had to do something. He picked up the call and immediately sped away. He drove as fast as he could, but the woman seemed to know exactly where he was going. Soon enough, she got out at her destination and without paying, ran off down the street. The driver waited for the police to arrive, but they didn't come. Decided to take matters into his own hands. Followed the woman, but she led him on a wild goose chase all over town. Finally, when he lost her, he returned home shaken and scared. He never accepted another ride from a female passenger. Some people thought he was being paranoid, but he knew what he had seen. In the end, the driver quit his job and changed his phone number. He never saw the woman again, but he always wondered who she was and what she wanted from him. We do not know how our driver managed to snap a photo of a woman who seemed to appear out of nowhere and then vanish just as quickly. Perhaps she was a figment of his imagination, a ghost, or maybe something more sinister. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, stay safe out there. Alright, here's a scary story about an empty funeral. It was one of those days where it just seemed like everything was going wrong. The traffic was terrible, the weather was awful, but despite all that, I had to go to work. It's not that I didn't want to be there. I just couldn't take any more time off. My boss would have fired me if I called in sick again. I work in a large office with lots of cubicles and lots of people. One of my coworkers, who we'll call George, was someone that I saw every day. We were close enough to say hi to each other in the morning or ask how each other's weekend was. But we weren't best friends or anything. On this particular day, I came into work to find out that George had passed away from a heart attack the day before. I was genuinely sorry to hear this. He was a good guy and, from what I could tell, a good husband and father. So I went to his funeral. It was a small ceremony at a church near his home. There were maybe 20 to 30 people there, mostly family and close friends. I didn't know most of them, but I did see one woman that I recognized. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she was someone that I used to hang out with in high school. After the funeral, I shook the woman's hand and told her that I was sorry for her loss. She looked at me for a second, then quickly looked away. I thought that maybe she was just in shock or something. So I gave her a hug and told her that I was thinking of her and her family. She screamed at me and pushed me away. Then she started to cry. I don't want to make her feel worse, so I just walked away. The next day I came into work to find everyone staring at me. I was confused until my boss came up to me and asked me if I knew what I had done. I was still half asleep at this point, so I just shook my head. Then he started to yell at me, asking me why I had assaulted one of our coworkers' wives at the funeral. Apparently, my touching her had been witnessed by several people, and they had confronted me about it. I tried to explain that I had only meant to comfort her because she was crying, but my boss didn't want to hear it. He fired me right then and there, tried calling the police to explain what had happened. But they said that since no one had pressed charges, there was nothing that they could do, and that was that. I didn't have a job, and no one would tell me what was going on. At this point, I should mention that I'm a pretty big guy, 6'4" and 220 pounds. I had always been friendly with everyone at work, so I had lots of big, burly male friends there. Called a couple of them to see if they could help me get in touch with someone at the company to clear my name, but no one would return my calls. A few days later, I got a phone call from my old high school friend. She told me that she was still very upset with me for what I had done, even though I had never touched her. Confused, I asked her what she was talking about. When she told me that I had attended George's funeral without knowing that he had already been cremated. She said that it was extremely rude of me to show up to a funeral for someone that had already been cremated. I felt like an idiot. I didn't know that he'd already been cremated, because no one had told me. I still felt bad because I had shown up to a funeral without the proper respect. I called the woman who had screamed at me and apologized. She told me that it was all right, and that I didn't need to come back to work. She also told me that she was going to put in a good word for me with the owner of the company. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the owner asking me to come back to work. I was shocked, but I was also very happy to hear that I still had a job. Now, some people might think that I deserved to be fired because I had, after all, assaulted someone, but I was also a victim in this case. In the end, things worked out okay for me. But what really freaked me out was that the whole time I was at the funeral, I saw George at his desk in the corner of the room. I didn't think much of it at the time because, well, he was dead. But now, I wonder if he was actually there. Was he trying to tell me something? Or was I just tired and seeing things? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Welcome back to my channel. Today I will be reading from the Arconjunction subreddit, so let's jump into it. The title of this story is The Voice in the Baby Monitor. It's a bit long, but it's definitely interesting. I had my son's baby monitor going from my phone to his room. As I was putting away the dishes in the kitchen, we had just finished dinner about 10 minutes ago, and he was playing happily. I could hear him giggling and playing with his toys as I washed the dishes. I didn't think anything of it until I started hearing a very clear voice in the baby monitor saying, "Mommy, Mommy, come here." I immediately went, "Oh wow, he's talking." He'd only said one word before this, and that was ball. He's 13 months old. I stopped what I was doing and listened closely. The voice said, "Mommy, Mommy, come here. I'm playing with my ball." I thought to myself, did he just say he's playing with his ball? I wasn't quite sure as I'd never heard him talk before. I decided to investigate. As I walked closer to his room, the voice said, "Mommy, come quick." As I got closer, I could see that the monitor was showing the empty crib. Where did that voice come from? I quickly checked under the crib, but there was nothing there. I looked around the room and noticed that the monitor was aimed at the empty space where the changing mat was. I checked there and on the dresser. Still nothing. I decided to walk back to the kitchen to check on the monitor there. As I got closer, the voice said, "Mommy, I'm here." I looked at the monitor, and it was showing the empty kitchen. I looked around to see if there was anyone there, and saw my 3-year-old daughter hiding behind the dishwasher. She was holding a little baby doll in her arms and was talking to it. She looked up at me and said, "I'm Mommy, and this is my baby. And we're waiting for Daddy to come home." She was talking in a baby voice. At that moment, my husband walked in and she yelled, "Daddy, you're home." She dropped the baby doll and gave him a big hug. My husband and I were shocked. We didn't know how she learned to do that, as we've never done that with her before. She just started talking in a baby voice and everything. We asked her how she learned to do that, and she said she learned it all by herself. This was 2 years ago, and she still likes to pretend play with her baby dolls and other toys. That is one crazy story. How does a 2-year-old just all of a sudden start talking like a baby? That is so crazy. And then also hiding in places. It's like I can imagine being a kid and wanting to hide and stuff. But like, hey, I'm a baby now, and nobody can find me because I'm a baby. I would have been freaked out if I were this mom. This reminds me of the story that my mom always tells me about when I was a kid. I think I was like 2 or 1, and she swears to this day that was talking and hiding like this little girl was talking in a baby voice and hiding like a baby. But anyways, that's all for me today. I hope you enjoyed that conjunction story. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to hear more, then definitely subscribe. I'll see you in the next Reddit video. Welcome to my channel. Today we will check out a scary phone story that will make you never pick up a call from an unknown number again. So let's begin. A woman was driving home from work one evening when she saw that she had a text message on her cell phone. She looked down at the screen and saw that she had an incoming call from an unknown number. The strange thing about this call is that it showed her own number on the caller ID. She hesitated for a moment, wondering whether or not to answer the call. But curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to pick up. On the other end of the line was a woman who sounded exactly like her. The woman on the phone started talking to her in a frantic tone, saying, "Get out of your car right now. There's someone in the back seat with you." The woman on the receiving end of the call was understandably confused and scared. She asked the woman on the phone, "Who is this? What are you talking about?" But the woman on the other end wouldn't answer her questions. Instead, she kept repeating her instructions, "Get out of your car. Now, there's someone in the back seat trying to kill you." The woman hung up the phone, assuming that it was some kind of prank call. However, just as she was about to get back on the road, she saw a man in a black hoodie trying to hide his face in the back seat of her car. Ow. She screamed and slammed on the brakes. As she turned around to get a better look at the man, he pulled out a knife and lunged at her. She was horrified, but luckily, she was able to escape unharmed. After calling the police, she recounted the entire incident to them, including the phone call and the man in the back seat. The police were skeptical about the phone call part of her story, thinking it was probably just a coincidence. They agreed to investigate the attempted murder, but they didn't seem convinced that the two incidents were connected. As the days passed, the woman couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. She couldn't understand why someone would try to kill her and then run away without finishing the job. And what was the meaning of that cryptic phone call? She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Determined to find answers, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She went through her phone records and found the exact time of the phone call. This meant that if the person on the other end of the line had used a landline, the call could be traced back to the exact house where it was made from. With this new lead, she went to the police and convinced them to do a thorough investigation of the area. They found a house that matched the description of the one from the phone records. As they searched the premises, they discovered a hidden room in the basement. Inside the room, they found a phone and began searching for its owner. They soon found the person who had made the threatening phone call. He was a private investigator who had been hired by the woman's husband to spy on her. The husband had become suspicious of his wife's activities and wanted to know if she was cheating on him. The private investigator had followed the woman for weeks, recording her every move. But he had never actually spoken to her. When he tried to approach her, she got scared and tried to drive away. In a panic, he called her, hoping to scare her off. He never intended to actually harm her. When the police confronted the private investigator with their findings, he confessed to everything. He told them that he had followed the woman for weeks, but he had never actually spoken to her before. He had only called her once, but it was enough to send her into a frenzy. He apologized for his actions and begged for forgiveness, but the woman was not interested in hearing his excuses. She was furious that he had invaded her privacy and put her life in danger. She vowed to sue him for everything he was worth. The private investigator was arrested and charged with stalking and assault. The woman was shaken, but unharmed. She learned that the person she had trusted with her life was not who she thought he was. It was a painful lesson to learn, but it was one she would never forget. That was all for today's story. Please subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Welcome to my channel. Today's story is The Man in the Photos. A woman was cleaning out her late grandmother's house. She had been going through boxes of old stuff in the attic when she came across an old photo album. Brought back some great memories and made her smile. But it also left her with a lot of questions. The woman had never seen most of these photos before. They were from the 1940s all the way to the 1980s. As she flipped through the photo album, she noticed something strange. Every single picture had the same man in the background. He was always standing behind her grandmother or other relatives. He seemed to be a part of the family, yet no one ever acknowledged his presence. He was always just kind of standing there. In some of the photos, he was standing next to a fireplace. In others, he was outside next to a swing set. In a few pictures, he was even holding a baby. But the most unsettling thing about this man was that he didn't seem to age at all. He looked the exact same in the 1940s as he did in the 1980s. As she continued looking through the photo album, she came across some more recent photos. These ones were from the 1990s. This time, the woman in the photos was her grandmother's sister, yet the man was still there in the background, still standing next to the fireplace. The woman was confused. Who was this man? Why was he in all these family photos? And how come no one ever mentioned him? Was he some kind of stalker? Had he kidnapped her grandmother? Or her aunt? Or maybe he wasn't a kidnapper at all. Maybe he was a close family friend. Maybe he had some kind of rare medical condition that prevented him from aging. The woman thought about calling the police, but what would they do? There was no crime involved. Plus, if there was a creepy man in all these photos, why didn't anyone else find him creepy? Maybe because they knew him. Maybe he was a relative. But that still didn't explain why he was never in any of the photos by himself. He was always in the background, never in the foreground. He was always just kind of standing there. The woman went downstairs to look for more clues. She found some old yearbooks and began flipping through them. She saw the same man in every single one. Here he was in the 1960s, and here he was again in the 1970s, still just kind of standing there. She decided to take a closer look at one of the photos. Maybe if she looked closely, she could get a better idea of what was going on. She looked at the back of the photo. On the back, written in her grandmother's handwriting, were the words, 1954 Christmas Party. So the man wasn't a kidnapper. Clearly, he was someone who had access to the house. Someone who had access to the house and wasn't afraid to be around people. This led the woman to believe that the man was a distant relative, maybe a creepy uncle that no one really liked, but he was still family. So why did he stand in all these photos? What was he trying to do? The woman thought about this as she looked at the back of another photo. This one was from 1978. She could see her grandmother, her aunt, and several other relatives. They were all standing in front of a fireplace mantel, and there was the man. He was standing behind the woman in the center. He was so close to her, yet she didn't acknowledge him at all. She didn't even seem to know he was there. Then it hit her. This wasn't some kind of mystery. This man wasn't some kind of kidnapper or stalker. He was simply a photographer. That explained why he was never in the foreground. He was always just kind of standing there in the background taking pictures. That explained why he didn't age in the photos. He wasn't actually in those photos. He was just taking the pictures. As the woman continued looking through the photo albums, she realized that each photo had been taken by a different photographer. Some were clearly taken by her grandmother or her aunt. Others were taken by a man with a slightly older camera. Those were the photos where the man was just kind of standing there in the background. The woman put the photo album back on the shelf. Now she understood. There was nothing creepy about the photos. There was no mystery. All the photos had just been taken by a family member. A weird family member who just kind of stood there in the background. Welcome to my channel. Today we will be telling you about the phone that answered itself. So let's get started. A woman named Annie from Manchester was home alone one evening when her phone suddenly lit up. On the screen was an incoming call from an unknown private number. Although she wasn't expecting any calls, she decided to pick it up anyway. But what she heard on the other end of the line was so shocking that it left her terrified and confused. She told the Manchester Evening News, "I was sitting at home alone and my phone started ringing. I looked at the screen and the caller ID said private because it was late at night and I was on my own. I was a bit nervous about answering. But then I thought, who doesn't have a private number these days? So I answered it. But as soon as she answered, she could hear a blood-curdling scream at the other end. She explained, when I answered the phone, all I could hear was screaming. It sounded like me screaming, but I definitely wasn't doing that. I could hear myself say, 'Don't call me again,' and then the line went dead." Obviously shaken by the call, Annie tried to dismiss it as a prank call. However, when her phone lit up again with another call from the same private number, she decided to call back the unknown caller. But when she did, she was met with an engaged tone. So she tried calling again, and this time the phone was answered by a man. She said, "I phoned back, but all I could hear was a dial tone. Then it cut off and I tried to ring it again, but it just kept cutting off." At this point, Annie's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to contact her phone provider to see if they could trace the call. But they informed her that because the call had come from a private number, they couldn't track it. A bit shaken by the mysterious call, Annie decided to go out for the evening with her friends, hoping to put the scary incident out of her mind. But the following day, she received a phone bill that showed a call from the same private number that had called her the night before. The call had lasted over 2 minutes. This is when she became convinced that something strange was going on and decided to contact the Manchester Evening News. They helped her to contact the phone company again, and this time they were able to track down the number. It turned out that the call had come from a local nursing home. Although Annie had never stayed at the nursing home or had any connection to it, she decided to contact them anyway. But when she called, they told her that they didn't know anything about the phone number and suggested that she contact the National Patient Advocate Service. When Annie called them, they told her that the nursing home had recently been taken over by a new management company, and they would no longer be able to help her trace the call. Determined to find out where the call had really come from, Annie took matters into her own hands. She started by searching online for the name of the nursing home, and was eventually able to find a website for the new management company. On the website, she found a phone number and decided to give them a call. When she asked them about the mysterious call, they told her that they didn't know anything about it and hung up on her. Still determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Annie contacted Ofcom, the communications regulator in the UK, and filed a complaint. However, they told her that because the call hadn't been to a premium rate number, they wouldn't be able to investigate. In the end, Annie was never able to find out who made the mysterious call or why they kept calling her. But she did change her number to stop the calls. Although this creepy story has a somewhat happy ending, it serves as a reminder to always be cautious when answering calls from unknown numbers. Who knows, it could save you from a lot of trouble. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave us a thumbs up. Also, if you can support us, we'll really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I'm going to tell you about a knock that followed a man home. This happened in a small town in Canada. The year before this happened to me, a guy was camping with his girlfriend, and he swears this story is true. He said he was sleeping in a 2-person tent with his girlfriend, and in the middle of the night, he heard 3 very distinct slow knocks on the tent. He said the knocks were not like someone hammering the tent with a hammer or anything like that. It wasn't frantic, and it wasn't aggressive. It was 3 distinct slow knocks, as if someone was knocking the tent with a wooden hammer or something like that. Obviously, he was freaked out sitting in the tent with his girlfriend in the middle of the forest, listening to these knocks. And then they both just kind of looked at each other and decided, let's just go home. They packed up their stuff, and they left. And the next morning when the sun was out and everything was nice and bright, they came back to that campsite to find absolutely nothing. There were no marks on the tent. There was nothing on the ground outside the tent. There was no footprints or anything like that. It was as if whoever or whatever was camping there was completely invisible. Well, fast forward a few months later, this exact same thing happens to him while he is sleeping in his own house. Now, obviously, this guy doesn't live in a tent anymore. So how do you explain 3 distinct knocks coming from inside your bedroom wall? He was sleeping in his own bed. His girlfriend was sleeping in the other bed. In the middle of the night, he heard 3 distinct knocks, just like the knocks that he had heard while camping. This time, though, the knocks were coming from the wall. He described it as someone knocking the wall, as if they were trying to communicate with him through the wall. Obviously, he was freaked out sitting in his bed listening to these knocks. And his girlfriend, being the ever-supportive and loving girlfriend that she is, told him to go check it out. So he gets out of bed, goes to the wall, puts his ear to the wall and listens. And he swears that on the other side of that wall was a voice that sounded like gravel being poured onto concrete. And it was whispering his name over and over and over again. He runs back to his bed, gets under the covers, and doesn't come out for, a few hours until the sun is shining and everything is nice and bright. Then he gets up and, of course, goes to that wall to inspect it. And there is absolutely nothing there. There's no hole in the wall. There's no indication that anything is behind the wall. There's no indication that anyone was ever even there. It's at this point that he calls me. And I told him, listen, buddy, I don't care what you do. You need to move. You need to get out of that house immediately. Because if something is happening to you in your own home, I can even imagine what it's gonna be like once winter sets in and you restuck inside. And obviously, he didn't listen to me, because if he did, he wouldn't have called me back the following week to tell me what happened next. He called me and he said, "You won't believe this." He said the exact same thing happened to him again that very next night. He said he was awoken in the middle of the night by what sounded like gravel being poured onto concrete. And then he started whispering my name over and over and over again. But it wasn't the voice that was coming from the wall. This time it was the voice that was coming from under his bed. Obviously, he freaks out again. He calls me. I tell him to move. He doesn't listen to me. He stays in the house. I guess he's still there because he eventually called me back to tell me that it happened again. This time, the gravel sound was coming from inside the closet. And when he put his ear to the closet, he could hear the voice whispering his name, and then it started to laugh. This is where I lose all credibility, because I told him we needed to do a voice recording and put it under his bed and see if the voice would talk into it. And that's exactly what he did. And that's exactly when the voice started talking to him through the recorder. Oh, I don't know what to tell you. I swear this story is true. Peter never told me what happened next, but I'm guessing he is still living in that house, and he is still talking to that voice. Welcome to my channel. Today's scary story is going to be one that I like to call The Shadow That Waved. It was submitted by a user. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I live alone, and my bedroom is at the opposite end of the house from the bathroom. My bedroom window is big, but it doesn't have a blind. Only a curtain that leaves a small gap in the middle where I can see out into the driveway. On this particular night, the full moon was shining directly through the gap in the curtains, illuminating the whole driveway. I was just about to go back to sleep when I saw the shadow of a person standing at the far end of the driveway. It was a male shadow, and it seemed to be staring directly at me. I don't know why, but this immediately set off all of my alarms. I don't get startled easily, but something about this made me extremely uneasy. I should mention that our driveway is long and quite steep, slopes down to a single-car garage at the bottom. At the top of the driveway, where the shadow was standing, there is enough room to park maybe 2 cars. But the rest of the driveway is narrow, just wide enough for 1 car to drive down it. So if anyone were to be walking down my driveway, especially at night, I would definitely hear them. I knew that whoever or whatever it was actually outside my window because I would have heard them walking on the driveway. As I watched, the shadow began to walk toward the bottom of the driveway. Our driveway is about 100 feet long. And as the shadow walked down the driveway, it took exactly 10 steps. After the 10th step, the shadow disappeared. I assumed that it had gone around the corner of the garage and gotten behind my car, which is parked in the garage. At this point, I was kind of laughing to myself, thinking how silly I was being. There's no way someone could have been walking down my driveway without me hearing them. Then I thought, what if it isn't a person? What if it's some kind of animal? I live in a rural area, so we do get the occasional bear or mountain lion wandering through the neighborhood. But these animals usually stay away from humans, and I didn't see any movement after the shadow disappeared around the corner, so I went back to bed. A few minutes later, I was awoken again by the sound of heavy footsteps near my front door. Footsteps that sounded like someone was stomping their feet. I got out of bed and went to investigate. Of course, when I opened the door, there was nothing there. I stepped outside to see if I could see any footprints in the grass, but there was nothing. It was as though whatever it was had come in through the front door and then left again. At this point, I was starting to feel a bit creeped out. I started looking around the house to make sure that all of the doors and windows were locked, because at this point, I was getting a bit scared. I walked past my bedroom window, and that's when I noticed something. On the ground beneath my window, right where the moon was shining, was a single footprint. It was clearly a human footprint. As I stared at the print, trying to make sense of what was going on, I noticed something else. The print looked almost exactly like mine. I bent down and compared the 2 prints side by side. They were identical. I don't want to sound crazy, but I could have sworn that my skin was crawling. I think whatever this thing is, it might be trying to get inside my house. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out into the driveway. I shone the light onto the print, and that's when I saw it. The edges of the print were slightly raised, as if something had wiggled its toes in the soft dirt. I couldn't help but shiver. Whatever this thing is, it knows I'm here. I stood there for a few seconds, just listening, but I didn't hear anything. It was silent except for the crickets. Then I heard a noise. It was a shuffling noise, like someone or something was moving around outside my house. I could hear it moving closer. I quickly ran back inside and locked the doors. As I stood there listening, the sound stopped. I waited a few seconds, and then I heard it again. This time it sounded like it was right outside my front door. Then I heard a knock. Just one single knock. It sounded like someone knocking the side of their shoe against the concrete. That was enough for me. I called the police and told them to come to my house. I could still hear whatever it was moving around outside my house. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes it sounded far away. I never heard it again, get any closer. When the police arrived, they couldn't find anything. Apparently the neighbors hadn't seen anything either. The officer asked me if I wanted him to walk around the neighborhood, but I declined. I was still freaked out about what I had heard, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. After the officer left, I stayed up for the rest of the night watching the front door. I never saw or heard anything again. But the next morning, when the sun was shining and I wasn't scared anymore, I went out into the driveway to look for clues. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. All of the locks were intact. The only thing that I found was the footprint, which had hardened overnight. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe I did imagine some of it. But one thing I know for sure is that I've never seen a shadow wave at me before. Hey, don't forget to subscribe for more scary stories and have a nice night. Welcome to my channel. Today I will tell you about the thing in the freezer. A man was cleaning out his freezer when he saw something unbelievable. Saw an eye that had been staring at him this whole time. This is the story of a man who was left speechless after he found a human eye in the freezer of one of his rental properties. The incident happened in 2013 in Prince George's County, Maryland. According to reports, the man had gone to the property to clean it out after the tenant had moved out. It was then that he noticed a container in the freezer that had a lock on it. It looked like the tenant had tried to hide whatever was inside from him. This raised his curiosity, and he tried to find out what was inside. He tried to break the lock but failed. So he called the police for help. When the police arrived, they too were unable to figure out what was inside. They ended up shooting the lock with a shotgun, shattering the glass and revealing the thing that was inside. And what he found was shocking. Instead of food or some other household item, there was a human eye staring back at him. The eye was completely frozen and covered in frost. Whoever put it in the freezer had done so in such a way that it would not be found for many months. But how did the eye get there? Who had put it there and why? These questions left the landlord with more theories than answers. He wondered if the person who had lived there had done some really bad things, and perhaps the eye belonged to one of their victims. Maybe it was an inside joke that he wasn't aware of. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a prank that had gone too far. Whatever the reason, he was glad that it was over and he could finally move on. But this is where the story takes a turn. The police were unable to determine whose eye it was or how it got there. Even DNA testing didn't provide any answers. It was as if the eye had come from another planet. But while the landlord was happy to finally close this strange chapter, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he opened the freezer, he felt like the eye was staring directly at him. It was as if it was judging his every move. Was it possible that the eye was cursed, or that the tenant had somehow put his soul into it? He didn't know. But he couldn't help but feel uneasy. After a while, he decided to get rid of the eye. He took it out of the freezer and buried it in the backyard. That should take care of it, he thought. But then he started having nightmares. In his dreams, the eye would come out of the ground and chase him around, its stare burning into his skin. He could hear its voice whispering his name over and over again. He tried to run, but its long, bony fingers always caught him and dragged him back down into the hole. One day, he couldn't take it anymore. He went back to the backyard and dug up the eye. He wanted to get rid of it, to take it as far away from him as possible. As he was throwing it into the trash, he heard a voice behind him. "Are you enjoying our little game?" The landlord turned around and saw the tenant standing there with a smirk on his face. "You shouldn't have touched my things," the tenant said. And that's when the landlord realized that he had made a terrible mistake. The tenant had never moved out. He'd been hiding in the house all along, and now he was here to get his eye back. The landlord screamed and ran as fast as he could, but it was too late. The tenant was faster and stronger. He caught up to the landlord and dragged him back to the house. Then he went into the freezer and took out the eye. As he was about to leave, he turned to the landlord and said, "I hope you learned your lesson. Don't ever touch my things again." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving the landlord alone in the darkness. And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.